So like I said, we're going to have some prophetic stuff at the end, which I think might identify one other giant. We'll see. But we are finishing up Kings. This is lesson 36. So with time off for good behavior and out of town and things like that, we've probably been almost a year in Kings. And so it's really sad. This is kind of going to be probably a little bit of a heavy message and prophetic word. But, you know, we need to hear those things. And so I just want to give you some warnings. Make sure you're staying in the Spirit and really praying into what you're hearing. But let's start with 2 Kings chapter 23. And we're going to do 31 through 35 first. So last week, Josiah, that story is one of the best as far as seeing a leader bring revival. Yet what is the scariest is that God said, no thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. It's too late. This nation is going to be destroyed. I appreciate your efforts. Because of them, you won't see it happen. But judgment on this land is done. So it doesn't matter what you do at this point. And it didn't. And we're about to see that. So when I say that when it comes to our country, I'm concerned. I don't want to get to where we cross the line and we lose our country and its original purpose like they did. And so that's what I mean is like, it's like, okay, well, we can have revival for years. Yet if the Lord has already announced judgment against us, it's too late. There's a point where the cup of iniquity is too full. And you guys might even be more concerned with the word I got at the end. I don't think the decision's been made, but we're definitely close. So we have this, great man of God that brought revival. He died in battle because he did not hear the word of the Lord through someone that was a pagan. Okay, so we talked about humility will hear even from those you dislike and those that don't even know God, right? So you have to make sure that you're hearing Holy Spirit in spite of the package. Well, here in verse 31, we see his son take over. I'm going to call him, well, I think I can pronounce it, Jehoahaz. Is that close enough, baby? Jehoahaz. And he was 23 years old when he began to reign. He reigned for only 3 months. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. And Pharaoh Necho put him in bonds at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. So this is the same Pharaoh Necho that told Josiah, Elohim told me to fight the Assyrians, and if you fight me, you're fighting God, and it's going to cost you his life. And that was a prophecy. Guess what? It cost him his life. So this is the same ruler. And he laid on the land a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. Now, I find it interesting. It wasn't Assyria that first led Jerusalem into captivity, nor was it Babylon. It was Egypt. We're full circle. They left Egypt out of bondage. They've been returned to Egypt in bondage. And it's kind of like, and I was discussing this with the source of the prophecy yesterday, that calamity and judgment are sudden. So everybody's going about their business, and then all of a sudden, everything is covered with calamity. And so this is a situation where they kept going on, provoking God's patience, provoking him to anger, and now they are back under dominion of Egypt. Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah's father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away, and he came back to Egypt and died there. And Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold of the people of the land, from everyone according to his assessment to give it to Pharaoh Necho. Now, I never saw this. I always, and this is what I like about systematically studying Scripture, because I did not ever see Pharaoh Necho's role in the destruction of a nation pre-Babylon. I didn't know that that's what occurred. So, just like with Israel, we're seeing a measure of captivity taking place in Judah, and there's a pattern. This is a pattern. So if you want to see what brings down nations, this is it right here, 1 through 9. Okay, so the first pattern is you have obedience. Okay? Obedience that equals blessing, prosperity, freedom, etc. God then puts them in their place, right? So once the Israelites, I didn't have much faith that they were going to figure things out because they were griping about the whole process to begin with. But the next generation, right, went into Israel, took the land, they were established. Number 2, a nation forgets God, and they begin to worship other things. He sends his people to warn of the consequences if we don't stop. Next, a lack of peace and strife enters the land, both from enemies within and without. More warning is given by the Lord. Eventually, pieces of the land are plucked out and taken over by the enemies of that nation. Can anyone say West Coast, East Coast? Tribute must be given to the kings of the victorious nation, and taxes go up. People then begin to go into captivity, which also includes debt, okay? And then eventually the nation falls to another. If you look at what wicked rulers do, is they destroy the economy, because no nation exists without an economy. You can't fund your military. You can't fund your government. You can't have roads. And so every ruler knows you go after the money. Once you get that under your control, and the people are now subject to you because you've given them more and more entitlements and more handouts, the people are now subject to you in their soul because people fear loss more than anything. And so they now will do whatever you say. Now that's what people that are unsaved are going to be like. Believers should not ever fall into that situation. The idolatry was in full steam in Judah when the decree of judgment was released. No reforms or revival was going to stop it. Don't think that signs and wonders are going to shift America. Or revival. Revival didn't shift Judah, and signs and wonders just infuriated the Pharisees. What will rescue America is a repentance of the people of God and a grassroots movement that shifts the political tide of this country, which I've got some updates on that. So I'm going to repeat myself, and I'm speaking prophetically. Revival and signs and wonders are not going to shift America. It's going to be repentance among the people of God and a grassroots movement that shifts the political tide of this country. There's more of us than them. Unfortunately, we are captive to our own idea of what Christianity looks like in local church things, while our country is being plundered by wicked leaders that we vote in, either on purpose or by not voting at all. The people of God must be equipped for how to handle political matters and things that might happen to them because of their faith. So in the monarchy of ancient Israel and Judah, the people could have said no. They could have demanded King Solomon stop worshiping other gods. They could have been in the Word. They could have protested. There are many things they could have done, but instead they began worshiping idols like the king, and it went downhill from there. And you might want to write next to that paragraph, institutional Christianity, because I've got a word for that, and you'll want to take note of it, because it's not in your notes. Cultianity, yeah. Okay. And the reason I say that institutional Christianity. The reason I say that is when you look at where we have precedent, kings fear one thing, their head being removed. And we saw that repeatedly with the 1100 charters, the Magna Carta, and I think 1215 or 1218, the Great Remonstrance, all of these 5 documents that were written to keep kings in their place. The kings feared their head being removed. What did they do? They appeased the people with agreement and then continued their diabolical plan of taking control of the money, provoking fear in the people through threat of war and plagues. Does it sound familiar? Okay, so this is why I'm saying the judgment for or against America has not yet occurred, but I feel we're on the precipice. Now, the thing that's interesting with the Lord is that we're at 400 plus years now into His patience. So America's been around since 1776 officially, 16 something, maybe 15 something unofficially. So as a country, we're still pretty young, but time is speeding up. I wouldn't get passive in thinking, well, it took them 400 years here. I don't think we have that much time for us. Okay, so in verse 36 through 37, Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebidah, the daughter of Pedaiah of Rumah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Now see, this right here, these 2 verses are why the Lord said, no. It won't matter, because the people's heart is way from them. It's just not going to matter at all.
Well, and once that He pronounced judgment on the fathers, He's not a liar. He had to go ahead with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to read a big chunk and just some, short discussion, and we'll get into the prophetic aspect. So in 2 Kings 24, 1 through 7, it says, in his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and then he turned and rebelled against him. The Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldeans, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the Ammonites, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord spoken by his servants, the prophets. So now there's an overwhelm. There's an ocean of calamity that is coming against these people. Surely this came upon Judah at the command of the Lord to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done. So even though Manasseh repented, everything he did led to this. Not to mention Hezekiah. Remember, he showed all the gold, all the treasury to the Babylonian envoy, and Isaiah said, because you did that, that will be the nation that will come and take this one. And he's like, well, as long as it doesn't happen while I'm alive. So, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not pardon. Now the rest of the deeds of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiakim his son reigned in his place, and the king of Egypt did not come up again out of his land. For the king of Babylon had taken all that belonged to the king of Egypt, from the brook of Egypt to the river Euphrates. Okay, so now Babylon is the world's superpower. Babylon started with Nimrod. So we're seeing a maturing of the seed of the enemy, and that the righteous people did not maintain righteousness. They did not maintain the ground that they took. Therefore, the world system is going to overwhelm and flood them and wipe them off the face of the earth, except for a remnant. Assyria was an issue for Israel. Babylon is now the country and an example of the end of the age battle between good and evil. At this point, Babylon is so powerful that Egypt itself has been subdued by Nebuchadnezzar. What's especially frightening is the innocent blood aspect that triggered the Lord's judgment. We have shed the innocent blood in this country alone, it might be actually 69 million babies now, but for sure 62 million at so that's 10 times the Holocaust. And look at the price Germany paid. So in verse 8, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. His mother name was Nehushta, the daughter of someone. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. Okay, so again, here we go. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants, his officials, and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took his prisoner in the 8th year of his reign, and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon, king of Israel, had made as the Lord had foretold. So this is a fulfillment of Hezekiah's judgment, what was going to happen there. But Jeremiah is a prophet during this time, and he was also a priest, if I'm not mistaken, or he could have been. So they believe that him and some other priests secreted the ark away. Some think it's in Ethiopia to this day at that one church. I don't know if it is or not, but the ark has never been found since this time right here. What's interesting is Jerusalem fell completely August something. I've got it written down somewhere. Fast forward to the fall of Jerusalem after the Lord's time, it was on the exact same day. And it might have been August 16th on both of them. I would have to look. God is very meticulous in his details. So he carried away all Jerusalem, all the officials, all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained, except the poorest people of the land. Now, why did he take the craftsmen? Because craftsmen are one of the weapons of the Lord. Remember, is it Zephaniah or Zechariah? What was God's response? It was to send in the craftsmen. All of us, except for Gigi, have craftsmen as our gifting. None remained except the poorest of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, the king's mother, his wife, his officials, the chief men of the land. He took into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon all the men of valor, 7,000, and the craftsmen and the metal workers, 1,000, all of them strong and fit for war. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So now bondage is naming the king. Okay? Now, here's one of the problems. With this nation, there were too many voices from air quote prophets contradicting each other. That's why it's so important for us to hear the word of the Lord ourselves and to use discernment on what we're listening to, because if you've got too many people speaking different things, and all that is in there is confusion. Or is the timing of this word different from this word, and that's what's off?
Now, I know towards the end of 2 Kings, there's an overlap where that was the time of Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
And Isaiah is filled with the words of their false prophets.
Yep.
So I think we talk about the prophets, and I think a lot of that is what Isaiah is talking about.
Yeah.
That they're false prophets.
They were contemporaries. Isaiah mainly to Israel, right? Jeremiah to Judah, but both of them kept saying, stop listening to these people. The reason people didn't want to listen to Isaiah and Jeremiah is they were actually fathers. They were trying to warn the children, we're about to be destroyed. People don't want to hear. They don't want to hear that. But God is faithful. If he says something, he's going to do it. The only way to stop is intercession. And even at that point, sometimes he's like, stop praying. It's too late. He told Jeremiah that. He said, stop praying. And Jeremiah wouldn't. He couldn't. Why? Because he loved his nation, right? We're supposed to love America. It ain't evil or wicked or anti-kingdom to love your nation. And so maybe one of the clues with your thought, Kathy, too, is that if the prophets are only saying good things, you might want to question whether they're really a prophet. Because a true prophet, especially to a nation, they will not just give you cheesecake all the time, right? They're going to make you eat your vegetables. So that may be a sign.
Well, and the prophet, if you're going through good times in your nation, the prophet is probably going to say it's not going to last. Because why else is he even there for? It's to tell them about what's going to come, not what is right now.
And it can also be, because if we take the idea that prophets are also preachers, right, in the New Testament context, so you have prophetic preachers, one of their jobs can be to encourage the people of God and a nation to continue on in good things and to turn their hearts to the Lord. So now you don't want someone that says they're a prophet and everything is negative. Mm-hmm. You don't want that either, because that's actually not God. So you have to, you got to know him, or you're not going to recognize when he's speaking. So you're absolutely right.
We have at least an advantage as a New Testament Christian, I'll put it that way, because we have Holy Spirit. We ought to be able to, that should resonate with what we're hearing.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's not, because people aren't listening, but back in the Old Testament, you know, they didn't quite have that advantage.
Yeah. One thing they did have, though, was the outline of the word that said a prophet, what they say, will come to pass 100%. And they could have used that as a measurement. For Jeremiah, his came true 100%. And they still refused to listen. So now with Jeremiah, I want to read this out of the notes in Jeremiah 27, 12 through 15, to bring some of his context in. He said, "To Zedekiah, king of Judah, I spoke in like manner. Bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him and his people, and you will live." So he's trying to tell them, just do what he says. Don't make a lion mad, right? Just do what he says. "Why will you and your people die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence, as the Lord has spoken concerning any nation that will not serve the king of Babylon? Do not listen to the words of the prophets who are saying to you, 'You shall not serve the king of Babylon.' It's a lie that they are prophesying to you. I have not sent them, declares the Lord, but they are prophesying falsely in my name, with the result that I will drive you out and you will perish, you and the prophets who are prophesying to you." Now guess what? They could have chosen their own discipline. They could have kept their nation, been under bondage. The Lord would have worked on their hearts, and possibly they would have returned to him. But nationalistic fervor through prophets ended up with the results that could have been prevented. Zedekiah, verse 18, was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years. Now, it's interesting that both of these kings, it's 11 years. 11 represents transition. It also represents rest. But every Christian who says they're going through transition are going through hell. But God's in the middle of it, right? So this is definitely a prophetic situation here. Now, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For because of the anger of the Lord, it came to the point in Jerusalem and Judah that he was cast out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Okay? All right, so here we are at the end of a nation. In the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, 10, okay, so that's judgment, right? The 10 commandments. For us, it's life, John 10:10. But for them, it was judgment. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And they built siege works all around it, so the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 14th month, the famine was so, or 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls by the king's garden. And the Chaldeans were around the city. And they went in the direction of the Arabah, but the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. They captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in chains, and took him to Babylon. So that the last image he saw was his children being killed. So according to what Jeremiah said, he could have died in peace, but instead he decided to not listen to the prophet. And I don't know, if he had the heart of Hezekiah, he might not have cared that all of his kids were killed. But if he did have a heart, I'm sure that was a tormenting image for the rest of his days.
Well, if nothing else, he knew his line was over.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even if he was just a vain.
Yeah. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. And he burned the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down. Now notice the author is starting with the house of the Lord. Judgment always starts with the house of the Lord. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest in the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. Now why? Because the poor will live for fear of survival. They're not going to rise up. They just want to make sure that they have food and a place to sleep. Okay? So that's why you got to get the intelligentsia, the craftsmen, the intellectuals, the political leaders, the business leaders. All of them have to go to Babylon, because you can't keep them in the nation, or they will form a way. That's what craftsmen do. They will form a way to solve the problem. So you can't keep them in the problem. You got to take them out of it, or they will figure it out. And that's why nations will often kill off those people as well.
And I believe in China, when had the revolution, was it Mao Zedong?
Mm-hmm.
They went and killed everyone that wore glasses, because that was a sign that they were educated and needed to read.
Man,
Because they did not know,
that is crazy.
and it was millions of people they killed, and that was exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Because they were the educated, they were the ones that knew how to do things, and that was their reasoning. Yeah, I mean,
Now,
that
of course,
was,
we know some people wear glasses, and they,
right.
that's not necessarily a sign of intelligence,
too
but
poor
yeah,
in that
era
culture
to have
glasses, unless they were had risen enough
and had
to be
education
able to,
and
right.
some prosperity.
So everybody that
Mhm.
wore glasses, that was a death sentence.
Wow.
I thought that that was one of those one little.
I would have got at least
That was one of those things that stick in your mind that you're like, woo. I don't remember anything else maybe
Yeah.
about it, but I could remember that. And
That's
I thought,
crazy.
wow, that was their reasoning. You
Huh.
wear glasses, you're dead.
Wow.
That'd be all of us in here except
And by
Mike.
the way, the first
Mike's super smart, so he'd
and
be
they-
able to
and they,
survive. We wouldn't.
they took their guns first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Took their guns first, and
You
then
have
they went
to
in there
disarm.
and killed everybody that was educated.
Well,
or
And that's why, like a lot of people are like, patting each other on the back of this bipartisan gun bill, right? You've got 15 of the GOP that went with it. Why does that concern me? Because we now have, for the first time in the history of this nation, the GOP going with more regulation toward gun control. So it's a slippery slope. They're not going to come after us personally by showing up at our houses to take our guns, because they know we'll use them. What they're going to do is regulate them so much and increase the price of ammunition in them so much that no one can afford to have a weapon.
the only thing that encouraged me was the
Supreme Court?
No, it was the greeting that John, Texas Senator
Cornyn.
Cornyn.
One of the betrayers?
Yes. Oh, they booed him for 5 straight minutes when he went out to do whatever he was going to say. I don't even know if he got to say it.
Good.
Because that was a long, they didn't even show how long it was, from what I was watching,
Yep.
because it was just
Probably cost him his political career.
well, hopefully.
I hope so. Okay, now verse 13. So we've got, things are just absolutely destroyed. The house of God is gone. And the pillars of bronze that were in the house of the Lord, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces and carried the bronze to Babylon. And they took away the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the dishes for incense and all the vessels of bronze used in the temple service. The fire pans also and the bowls, what was of gold, the captain of the guard took away as gold, and what was silver as silver. As for the two pillars, the one sea, and the stands that Solomon had made for the house of the Lord, the bronze of all these vessels was beyond weight. The height of the one pillar was 18 cubits, and on it was a capital of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits. A lattice work and pomegranates, all of bronze, were all around the capital. And the second pillar had the same with the lattice work. So God's now divorced his people, and he's left his house to be plundered. And the captain of the guard took Sariah the chief priest, and Zephaniah the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the threshold. And from the city he took an officer who had been in command of the men of war, and 5 men of the king's council who were found in the city, and the secretary of the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were also found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them, brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and the king struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was taken into exile of its land. Now, in your notes, I've got 2 scriptures I wanted to bring out. The one is Ezekiel 10:18 through 19, and then same book 11:22 through 24. Then the glory of the Lord went out from the threshold of the house and stood over the cherubim, and the cherubim lifted up their wings and mounted up from the earth before my eyes as they went out, with the wheels beside them. And they stood at the entrance of the east gate of the house, and the glory of the Lord of the glory of the God of Israel was over them. And in 11, the cherubim lifted up their wings with the wheels beside them, and the glory of the God of Israel was over them. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountaintop, and that is on the east side of the city. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me in the vision by the Spirit of God into Chaldea to the exiles. Then the vision that I had seen went up for me. So what's happening here? God is giving Ezekiel a behind-the-scenes picture of what occurred. He left his house in stages, and finally he left it completely. And so because the cherubim and the wheels, those cherubim are always around his presence. Wherever he is, there's cherubim. That's why what Lucifer did was so egregious, because a cherubim's role is to guard the presence of the Lord. That's what they do, and cover him. And so basically we're seeing him packing up and leaving his house. So once he left, who's going to take it? The enemy, of course. So in 22,